I found out my neighbor had stolen part of my yard on a Tuesday morning, and the man was standing right on top of it, sipping coffee like he owned the whole county. The worst part was, for almost a year, I had walked past that same strip of concrete, waved at him, smiled at him, even complimented the driveway once, not knowing nearly 6 feet of it was sitting on land I was paying taxes on. And when I finally showed him the proof, he did not look embarrassed. He did not look surprised. He looked offended, like I had somehow insulted him by measuring what already belonged to me. My name is Mason Clark, and back in 2020, my wife Nora and I bought a small brick rambler outside Pine Hollow, North Carolina. The kind of place that does not look like much on a real estate website, but feels right the second you step onto the porch. It had a wide front yard, 2 maple trees that dropped leaves like they were trying to bury the house every fall, and a long side lot that Nora immediately started calling the dog kingdom, because all she wanted was a cedar fence, a little gate, and enough room for our 2 mutts to run without her having to yell. Bailey, no. Every 7 minutes. I liked the quiet out there. Honestly, Pine Hollow was not fancy, not polished, just a sleepy stretch of houses where people knew which trash cans belonged to which driveway, where old men pressure washed things that did not need pressure washing, and where everybody acted friendly as long as nobody asked too many questions. Next door lived Dale Hargrove, a man in his early 60s with a grey moustache, a heavy walk, and the kind of voice that made even a normal sentence sound like a warning. Dale was not rude at first. Not exactly. He waved. He talked over the fence line that did not exist yet. He gave me opinions about lawn fertilizer, county taxes, roof shingles, mailbox height, and once, for reasons I still do not understand, the moral decline of barbecue sauce. He was one of those men who had lived in a place long enough to believe his memory was more official than paperwork. His driveway was huge, wider than anyone else's on the block. A clean grey slab that curved along the side of his garage and opened into a parking pad where he kept a white pickup, a base boat, and sometimes a faded camper with one tire that always looked low. I noticed it the first week we moved in, mostly because it came so close to our side yard, but the previous owner had not mentioned anything. The closing documents looked normal, and I had enough problems trying to find the shutoff valve for the washing machine, so I let it go. That is how these things start, I think. Not with a fight, not with someone banging on a door, but with a quiet assumption that because something looks permanent, it must be right. For almost 11 months, Dale and I were what I would call polite neighbors, not friends, not enemies, just 2 men who nodded at each other while pretending yard work was more interesting than conversation. Then spring came, and Nora finally circled a Saturday on the calendar and said, "Fence month," like she was announcing a holiday. We had saved the money, picked the panels, chosen black hardware, even argued over whether the gate should swing inward or outward, which somehow became a 30-minute marriage debate over freedom, practicality, and one very confused Labrador. I decided to hire a surveyor before the fence crew came out, because my father was a contractor, and if he taught me anything, it was this: never trust a fence line that was explained to you by somebody holding a beer. The surveyor was named Glenn Porter, a quiet guy with sunburned hands, silver hair, and equipment that looked expensive enough to make me nervous just watching him carry it. He arrived early, walked the lot, checked county pins, set up his tripod, and spent the morning moving around with that slow, calm confidence professionals have when they already know the answer but want the earth itself to admit it. Around lunchtime, I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when Glenn knocked on the back door and said, "Mason, you might want to come out here a second. There are certain tones people use that tell you the next sentence is going to cost money." I stepped outside, wiping mustard off my thumb, and followed him toward Dale's driveway. Glenn had placed little orange flags along what I assumed was our side yard, except the flags were not near the grass edge where I expected them to be. They were cutting straight through Dale's concrete. I laughed once, because my brain needed half a second to reject reality before accepting it. Glenn did not laugh. He tapped one flag with his boot and said, "Your property line runs here." Then he pointed to the driveway. "That slab crosses over 5 feet and 11 inches at the widest point, and it keeps going for about 34 feet. I looked at him, then at the concrete, then at Dale's pickup sitting partly on what was apparently my land, and I felt this slow, strange heat rise into my face. Not rage, not yet, more like embarrassment. like I hadn't been the last person in the room to understand a joke. I asked him if he was sure. He showed me the plat, the measurements, the old pin locations, the county record, and then, because I apparently needed to hear myself sound stupid, I asked him again. Glenn gave me a patient smile and said, "I checked it twice before I knocked." That was the moment the whole neighborhood changed shape in my mind. The open space beside our house was not just open space anymore. Dale's driveway was not just a driveway. It was a claim, poured in concrete, sealed over, parked on every day, treated like fact because nobody had challenged it. Still, and I want to be clear about this, I did not want a war. I did not walk over there looking for a fight. That evening, after Nora and I sat at the kitchen table staring at the survey like it might apologize if we waited long enough, I printed a copy, put on clean shoes, and walked next door. Dale opened before I even finished knocking, holding a mug that said "World's Okayest Grandpa." He looked past me toward the yard and said, "Fence people already giving you trouble?" I forced a small smile and said, "Not exactly. Got something weird here." I handed him the survey. He squinted at it, and for a few seconds his face stayed blank enough that I thought maybe this would be simple. Maybe he would say, "Well, I'll be." Nobody ever told me. Maybe we would stand there like adults and figure out whether the concrete could be cut, whether I could sell him a narrow strip, whether some old mistake could be fixed without turning two houses into a battlefield. But Dale's jaw shifted just a little, and his eyes went from the paper to the driveway, then back to me, and whatever softness had been in his face disappeared. "This is wrong," he said, not confused, not curious, just wrong. I told him Len was licensed, and the survey matched county records. Dale handed the paper back like it had dirt on it. "County records are full of nonsense." I kept my voice even, because there is a moment in every conflict where you can feel the temperature rising, and you either throw gasoline or you open a window. I said, "Dale, I'm not accusing you of anything. I just need you to know that part of the driveway is on my lot, and we're trying to put up a fence." He stared at me in a way that made the porch light behind him feel suddenly too bright. "That driveway has been there 14 years. The man who lived in your house before you never had a problem with it." I said, "I understand that. But legally, the line is here now, and it was there then too." Dale let out a dry little laugh, the kind men use when they're trying to make you feel young. "You people move in from wherever, and suddenly a piece of paper matters more than being neighborly." I remember feeling my stomach tighten, because there it was. The real issue, not concrete, not measurements, but control. Dale had gotten used to the space, used to everyone stepping around him, used to the idea that if he said something with enough certainty, other people would eventually get tired and let him have it. I told him I wanted to handle it the right way. He leaned closer, not enough to threaten me, just enough to remind me he was bigger, older, and on his own porch. Then he said, "The right way is you build your fence somewhere else." For a second, I honestly had no words. Somewhere else, like my land, was a suggestion. Like a county plat was just a restaurant menu and he did not like the options. I looked at the driveway one more time, at the clean sealed concrete running over the line like it had every right to be there, and I said, "Dale, that is not going to work." His face hardened. "Then I guess you have yourself a problem." He stepped back, one hand on the door, and right before he shut it, he said, "That concrete is not moving." The door closed softly, almost politely, and somehow that made it worse. I stood there on his porch holding survey, listening to the evening insects buzzing in the hedges, and I knew right then that the fence was no longer the story. The story had become Dale Hargrove deciding that if he had taken something long enough, the rest of us were supposed to pretend it had always been his. I walked back across my yard with that survey in my hand, and I remember this ridiculous little thought hitting me halfway between his porch and mine, that I had just been told to move my fence off my own property by a man standing behind a doorbell camera shaped like an owl. I do not know why that detail stuck with me, but it did. Maybe because the whole thing felt absurd, like the kind of problem you hear other people talk about at cookouts and think, well, there has to be more to that story. There was more, all right, but none of it made Dale look better. Nora was at the kitchen table when I came in, still wearing her reading glasses, still looking at the survey like it was a medical test result. She looked up and said, "Well," I put the paper down and said, "He says the concrete is not moving." For a second, she just stared at me. Then she gave this tiny laugh, not because it was funny, but because the human brain sometimes laughs when reality forgets to make sense. He said it like that? Pretty much. She leaned back in her chair and said, "So he thinks if he talks like a county commissioner, land changes shape?" That was Nora. Calm voice. Sharp blade. I wanted to be angry, but honestly, at first I was mostly disappointed. I had pictured some uncomfortable but decent conversation. I had pictured two homeowners solving an old mistake. I had not pictured a grown man acting like the deed to my house was a suggestion box. Still, I slept on it. Then I slept on it again. I told myself maybe Dale had been embarrassed. Maybe he needed a day or two to climb down from whatever mountain of pride he had built under himself. So I did what I thought any reasonable person would do. I filed the certified survey with the county recorder, made copies of everything, and mailed Dale a formal encroachment notice through certified mail. Polite wording, no threats, no insults, just the facts. The driveway crossed onto my parcel. We intended to build a fence, and I was asking him to correct the issue within 60 days. I even had a lawyer friend from college look at it before I sent it, and she said, "This is boring," which in legal terms means perfect. Dale signed for it on a Friday morning. By lunch, my phone rang. Unknown number, but I knew. I answered, and before I could say hello, Dale said, "You really put paperwork on me?" I looked through the kitchen window and saw his pickup sitting exactly where it had been sitting, one tire on the part Glenn had marked as mine. I said, "Dale, I tried talking to you." He made that dry laugh again. "No, you tried ambushing me with a map." I said, "It is a survey." He said, "It is garbage." I said, "It is certified." He said, "Certified by who? Some kid with a tripod?" I almost smiled at that, because Glenn looked like he'd been surveying land since Moses needed directions, but I kept my voice steady. "Dale, I gave you 60 days because I do not want this to become ugly." There was a pause, just long enough for me to hear his breathing change. Then he said, "Listen to me carefully, Sam. I do not know how you handle things wherever you came from, but around here, folks do not drag neighbors into county offices over a strip of concrete." That word, son, landed exactly how he meant it to. I was 38 years old, paying a mortgage, paying taxes, standing in my own kitchen, and he was trying to shrink me down to some kid who needed correcting. I said, "Around here, do folks usually park their trucks on someone else's land?" He went quiet. Nora, who was standing near the sink by then, raised her eyebrows like she had just heard a tennis ball land in bounds. Dale came back colder. "You are going to regret making enemies over 5 feet of dirt." I said, "Actually, it is almost 6 feet, and it is not dirt anymore because you poured concrete on it." That was the first time I heard him truly lose his temper. He called the survey fake, called the county useless, said the old owner had given him permission, said everybody knew about it, said I was stirring up trouble because I wanted to prove something. And maybe that was the part that bothered me most, because every accusation was really a confession turned inside out. He had been proving something for years. He'd been proving he could take up space and people would bend around him. When he finally hung up, Nora looked at me and said, "Well, that was neighborly." I told her I still wanted to give him the 60 days. She nodded, but I could tell she thought I was being too generous. Maybe I was. The next couple of weeks were strange in a way that is hard to explain unless you have lived beside someone who is quietly trying to intimidate you without crossing the line far enough to get called out. Dale stopped waving. Then he started waving, too much, slow and sarcastic, like he was hosting a parade, only he could see. He parked farther over on the disputed section, not by accident, not because he needed room, but because he wanted me to know he could. Sometimes when I came outside, he would suddenly decide to sweep the driveway, making long, aggressive strokes with the broom right across the orange flags Glenn had left behind. One afternoon, I was bringing in groceries and he said loudly, not even looking at me, "People get a little land and think they're kings." Another time, while Nora was planting rosemary near the porch, he said to someone on his phone, "Yeah, some folks move in and start measuring kindness by the inch." Nora came inside smelling like dirt and herbs and said, "Your boyfriend is outside performing again." I laughed harder than I should have, because if I did not laugh, I was going to walk over there and say something dumb. Then Mrs. Calloway got involved, and by involved, I mean she appeared at the edge of my driveway like neighborhood gossip had summoned her out of the azaleas. Mrs. Calloway lived across the street in a pale yellow house with wind chimes on every corner and the sharpest eyes in Pine Hollow. She was probably in her 70s, maybe older, but she moved with the confidence of a woman who had seen every scandal on that block and outlived most of the people responsible. She watched Dale pull away one morning, waited until his truck turned the corner, then crossed over and said, "So you finally found out about the driveway? I was holding a trash bag and nearly dropped it," I said finally. She nodded like I had arrived late to my own meeting. "Honey, half this street knew. That thing was never right." I asked why nobody said anything. She looked over at Dale's house, and for the first time her expression got serious, because Dale can make a sunny day feel like a lawsuit. Then she told me what she knew. Years earlier, Dale had bought that camper and decided his original driveway was too narrow. Instead of hiring a contractor to check the lines, he poured an extra pad himself with 2 cousins and a rented mixer. The man who owned our house back then was named Harold Pritchard, a widower with heart problems and no appetite for conflict. Harold apparently noticed the concrete creeping over but never fought it. According to Mrs. Calloway, Harold once told Dale, "I am too tired to argue with you," and Dale had spent the next decade translating that into permission. That was the part that made my chest tighten, because it was not just a mistake anymore. It was a pattern. Dale had not misunderstood the line. He had learned that if he pushed hard enough against a tired person, the tired person might step back, and after enough years, the push started looking like ownership. By day 42, Dale did something that still makes me shake my head. I was standing at the kitchen sink rinsing a coffee mug when I heard the sticky roll of a sealant brush. I looked out, and there he was, bent over the driveway, spreading glossy black sealer across the exact section the survey had marked, right over the area named in a notice. Smooth, careful, almost ceremonial. It looked less like maintenance and more like a dare. He worked slowly too, like he wanted an audience. When he noticed me watching, he straightened up, held the roller in one hand, and gave me 2 fingers off his forehead. A little salute, like we were buddies and not 2 men counting down to an expensive lesson. Nora came beside me, saw what he was doing, and whispered, "Is he sealing the evidence?" I said, "Apparently." She said, "That is either confidence or a medical condition." I smiled, but something in me changed right there. Up until then, I had left some space in my mind for misunderstanding, pride, maybe even embarrassment. But watching Dale polish that slab after getting a formal notice, after seeing the survey, after being given 60 days, I understood that he was not confused. He was choosing. He was choosing to make me either back down or become the bad guy. So I started documenting everything. Photos, dates, times, notes, copies of letters, delivery receipts, even the little comments when witnesses were nearby. My lawyer friend said, "Boring is good, detailed is better." By the time day 60 arrived, I had a folder thick enough to make a bureaucrat emotional. Dale did nothing. No contractor, no letter, no offer, no apology. Not even a bad idea dressed up as compromise. On day 61, I filed a complaint with county zoning and property compliance. 2 weeks later, a white county truck pulled up in front of my house, and out stepped a man named Russell Vance, the kind of county inspector who looked like he had heard every excuse in the English language and retired sympathy sometime around 2009. He had a clipboard, a measuring wheel, and a face that did not invite storytelling. I walked him through the survey, the notice, the photos, the timeline. He listened, nodded once in a while, then went outside and started measuring. When he reached the driveway, he stopped, checked the plat, rolled the wheel again, looked at the flags, then looked at the concrete. "Yep," he said, "that is over the line. No drama, no courtroom speech, just yep. And of course, because life has timing when it wants to be cruel." Dale came out right then, wiping his hands on a rag like he had been summoned by the smell of accountability. "What is this?" Russell introduced himself. Dale folded his arms. "That survey is wrong." Russell did not even blink. "County record agrees with it." Dale pointed at the slab. "This driveway has been here longer than he has," Russell said. "Land boundaries do not age out because concrete sits on them." I will never forget that sentence. Dale stared at him like he had just been slapped with a dictionary. Then he said, "So what? You are going to make me tear it up." Russell flipped a page on his clipboard and said, "If you do not correct the encroachment by the compliance deadline, the county will issue daily fines and pursue enforcement." Dale looked at me then, and for 1 second, all the sarcasm was gone. What replaced it was worse. It was pure resentment, the kind that says, I do not care what is right. I care that you made someone tell me no in public. Russell handed him the order. Dale took it, read the first few lines, and his face went red from the neck up. Nobody spoke. A lawnmower buzzed somewhere down the block. A dog barked once, and there we all stood beside that illegal strip of driveway, listening to Dale Hargrove discover that confidence is not a property deed. For about a week after Russell handed Dale that order, the whole street got quiet in a way that almost felt staged. Dale stopped sweeping the driveway. He stopped making comments. He stopped doing that slow little fake wave whenever I walked outside. His truck still sat there, but not as proudly somehow, like even the tires knew the party was over. Nora said it felt like living next to a thunderstorm that refused to rain. I kept expecting some final performance from him, some angry knock on the door, some handwritten letter full of capital letters, maybe even one of those speeches men give when they realize the facts have turned against them, but they still want credit for being wrong loudly. Instead, nothing. Then his brother showed up on a Saturday afternoon in a red pickup with a cracked windshield and a dog box in the back. And that was the first time I understood Dale had been telling a different version of the story to everybody else. I was in the garage sorting fence brackets when I heard them arguing. Not talking. Arguing. His brother said, "You should have handled this before the county got involved." Dale snapped back, "I am not tearing up my driveway because some new guy wants to play land baron." His brother said, "Dale, it is on his property." There was a silence after that, the kind that tells you somebody finally said the sentence. Everyone else had been stepping around. Then Dale barked. "Harold said I could use it." His brother came right back. "Harold said he was too sick to fight with you." That is not the same thing. I stood there with a box of screws in my hand, frozen, because there it was, the whole ugly truth laid out between two pickup trucks. Dale had not made one honest mistake. He had taken a tired man's surrender and dressed it up as permission. The argument ended with a trapdoor slamming hard enough to make Nora look up from the porch, and Dale's brother peeled away, leaving Dale standing in the driveway, alone, staring down at the concrete like it had betrayed him. The compliance deadline came 3 days later. Nothing happened. No source, no crew, no movement. The next morning, a county notice appeared near the front of Dale's property, bright and official and impossible to miss. Daily fines had started. I would not pretend I did not feel something when I saw it. Not joy, exactly. Not revenge. More like the deep breath you take when someone finally turns the lights on in a room where everybody has been pretending not to see the mess. By noon, Dale was on the phone in his driveway, pacing so hard I thought he might wear a second trench into the concrete. By Tuesday, contractors started stopping by. Men in work boots measured, pointed, shook their heads, wrote numbers on clipboards. Dale got smaller every time one of them gave him an estimate. Pride is expensive when it is poured 6 inches thick. On Thursday morning, I heard the backup beep of a utility truck before I even had coffee. I looked out the kitchen window and saw a demolition crew unloading a concrete saw, jackhammers, orange cones, and a small skid steer. Nora came in tying her robe and said, "Please tell me that it's not your alarm clock." I said, "Better. It is Dale's invoice." She looked out the window and just whispered, "Oh my God." The crew started by snapping chalk lines exactly where Glenn's flags had been. Then the saw screamed to life, that high metallic whine cutting through the morning like a dentist drill for the neighborhood. Dale stood on his porch with his arms crossed, jaw locked, watching men cut a clean, straight line through the driveway he had defended like a family heirloom. Dust rose in pale clouds. The saw bit deeper. The first crack came like a gunshot. Then the jackhammers started, chunk by chunk. The stolen strip broke apart. Pieces of concrete Dale had sealed, parked on, bragged about, and lied around were lifted out and tossed into a dump trailer like old sidewalk. Nobody cheered. Nobody clapped. That would have made it cheap. The satisfaction was in the silence, in the exactness of it, in the way the crew followed the legal boundary without caring about Dale's feelings, my feelings, neighborhood rumors, old excuses, or who had been there longer. They measured, cut, broke, hauled, and moved on. Mrs. Calloway came outside with a coffee mug and pretended to water flowers that had never been in danger of dying. 2 houses down, a man named Pete slowed his lawnmower to a crawl. Even the mail carrier took an extra long look. Dale never left the porch. He just sat there in a folding chair by lunchtime, elbows on knees, staring at the gap where his certainty used to be. I remember standing in my kitchen with Nora beside me, both of us quiet, and realizing the strangest part was that none of this had needed to happen. He could have knocked on my door after the first conversation and said, "Mason, I hate this, but let's figure it out." He could have offered to pay for the cut. He could have asked for time. He could have told the truth about Harold and admitted he had let the years convince him of something that was never real. Instead, he turned a property line into a loyalty test, and the county gave him an answer with a jackhammer. By the end of the day, the driveway looked like someone had taken a giant bite out of it. The next morning, another crew came and poured a neat new edge right along the boundary, smooth and clean and almost funny in how normal it looked. That was what got me. After all that drama, all that resentment, all those threats about neighborliness and respect, the final result was just a straight hedge of concrete sitting where it should have been from the beginning. A week later, our fence crew arrived. They set cedar posts along the survey line, one after another, careful, square, permanent. Nora brought lemonade out like we were hosting a barn raising instead of closing the last chapter of a property dispute. When the panels went up beside Dale's newly trimmed driveway, the whole thing finally made sense visually. On his side, concrete. On ours, yard. Between them, a fence line so clean it felt like punctuation. One installer stepped back and said, "Looks like it was always supposed to be this way." Nora smiled and said, "Funny how peaceful things look when nobody is stealing them." I nearly choked on my lemonade. Dale heard it. I know he did, because his garage door stopped halfway for a second, then kept going down. He did not apologize. He did not explain. For weeks, he moved around like a man trying to become background scenery. Then one evening, maybe a month later, I was watering the new grass near the fence when he came out for his mail. We ended up standing maybe 20 feet apart, close enough that pretending not to see each other would have been more awkward than talking. He looked at the fence, then at the driveway, then at me. His face was tired, but not sorry. He said, "Happy now?" I turned off the hose. I thought about giving him a sharp answer. I had earned one. I thought about saying, "No, Dale, I was happy before you made your driveway my problem." But the truth was simpler than that, and maybe more annoying to him. I said, "I am relieved." That was all. He stared like he had expected a victory lap and gotten a weather report. Then he muttered something I could not hear and went back inside. That was the last real conversation we ever had. The following spring, a for sale sign appeared in his yard. 2 months later, Dale was gone. The base boat, the camper, the pickup, all of it. A younger couple bought the place. Ben and Ashley, friendly people with a toddler, a golden retriever, and the healthy fear of property surveys every homeowner should have. The first weekend, they moved in. Ben pointed at the clean edge of the driveway and said, "So I heard there was a little concrete drama here." I laughed and said, "That depends who you ask." He grinned and said, "Do not worry, man. We are not planning to annex your lawn." And just like that, the neighborhood breathed again. The dogs run that side yard now. The cedar fence has weathered into a soft brown. The driveway ends exactly where the county says it ends. Sometimes when I'm pulling weeds along that fence, I think about Harold, the old owner, and how one tired, yes, or maybe one tired silence, can become somebody else's headache years later. I think about Dale too, more than I probably should. Not with anger anymore, just with this strange understanding that some people confuse being unchallenged with being right. They mistake patience for permission. They mistake fear of conflict for agreement. And once they build their whole identity around being the man nobody questions, a simple survey can feel like an attack. But here is the thing. Land records do not care how long you have been comfortable. Concrete does not become honest just because it has been there a decade. And being neighborly does not mean letting someone take what belongs to you just because they might get loud when you say no. So, I want to know what you would have done. If your neighbor built part of his driveway on your property, parked on it for years, then acted like you were the problem for proving it, would you let it slide to keep the peace? Would you try to make a private deal? Or would you do exactly what I did and let the county cut the truth straight through the concrete? Drop your answer in the comments, because I have the feeling this one is going to split people right down the property line.